It's time to get your music radio ready with the Audio Skills Podcast. It doesn't matter what type of music you're creating or what gear you use. It's all about the technique. Get ready to turn your home studio into a place where your music goes platinum. Now give it up for your host, Scott Hawksworth.
Hey everyone, Scott here with you for this week's episode of the Audio Skills Podcast. We've got an awesome show for you today where I'm going to be joined by Kendal Osborne, a recording studio owner who has his own podcast called The Recording Lounge. And our topic for discussion today is going to be all about recording. But before we jump into all of that, I wanted to start with my audio tip of the week. As with everything we do at Audio Skills, whether it's on our YouTube channel, our membership site, or on our podcast, I want to make sure that you can get some actionable tips and takeaways to apply to your own recordings and mixes right away. So for this week, given that we are going to be talking about recording, I wanted to go with a bit of a philosophical tip, and it's related to recording. And the tip is this: don't ever forget about the power of choice in recording. I've often mentioned something I like to follow when recording called the two-position rule. And it's the idea that I record a take of an instrument, let's say it's a guitar, and then I will intentionally move the microphone to a new position and record a second take. I'll then compare the two and go with which one I like better. This is intentional because it's all about giving me more options with recording. And that's something that you should really strive for, more options. Whether it's getting multiple takes on vocals, which you can then use bits and pieces of each take to make the perfect performance, or just making sure that you've got your drums mic'd up in the best possible position. Choice is key. Obviously, you should limit yourself a bit. If you spend all this time, getting 50 plus different positions for every instrument, you're going to be recording for far too long. You'll never get anything done. But even just saying to yourself, okay, I'm going to try one or two more positions right now, and I'm going to listen to them, kind of like A-Bing, which I've mentioned before, and listen to which one I like best and go with that one. And it can really work wonders when you're recording. So that's your audio tip of the week. Remember the power of choice. All right, so now I am so thrilled to introduce our guest for this week. Kendal Osborne is the owner and head engineer at The Closet Studios in Tulsa, Oklahoma. He also runs the Recording Lounge podcast, which was started in 2009, and it's an associated site where he shares his audio expertise. So bottom line, when it comes to audio, I think it'd be safe to call Kendal a bit of a guru. So Kendal, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today, man.
Sure, I'm happy to be here.
How are things going for you so far? How's your spring been?
Oh, it's been pretty good. Started slow this year around the studio, but it's kicking up finally. So, can't complain.
Right on. Yeah, I'm actually, things are busy here, but then I'm also knee deep in wedding season. So I've been traveling around. I've already had 3 weddings so far this spring. So
right. Yeah,
that's how it goes, right?
Good time for that. A handful of my clients do wedding photography and video and stuff, and they're killing it right now.
Yeah, good time to be in that business for sure. So to start us off, can you tell us just a little bit more about your work? I mentioned that you own a studio, The Closet Studios, and you also run a fantastic podcast, which is The Recording Lounge. What's the story there?
Well, so I run a studio full time, 60 hours a week, every week, and pretty much all year round. Yeah. I take 3 days off at Thanksgiving, 2 days off on July 4th, and 2 weeks off at Christmas, and that's it. So
wow.
Every other day I'm pretty much here. So I mostly work with indie bands from around the state and surrounding states, but also do some mixing and mastering work for online clients from people that just find me, or people around the world. With the internet, you know how that goes.
Oh yeah.
And so that takes up most of my time. I also teach a night class here in town once a week at a local tech school, which is, I have one class for recording and producing and then a separate class for editing, mixing. And each one is sort of taught in series. So there's the recording class for a semester, then an editing, mixing class, and then recording class, editing, mixing class. And when I have spare time, I have the Recording Lounge podcast, which you mentioned, which really just kind of started as a fun way to give back to the audio community. It's almost 10 years ago now. I guess you said 2009 is what you said. You know better than me at this point. Jeez. It's grown quite a bit. I kind of made a foolish move, and early on there weren't any like metrics or anything for gauging listenership. Mm-hmm. And so to this day, I actually have no idea how many people are listening to the show. Hopefully a lot. So, if anyone's out there listening, go listen to my show.
Right on. That's cool. So obviously it sounds like you have your hands in a lot of different things and work on a lot of different things, all kind of related to audio.
Yes. And I love it. I'm not one of those burnout people that's tired of it. I really do love what I do. I don't think I could do it as much as I do it if I didn't love it.
Absolutely. Yeah. I've heard those stories. I had a friend who, he went to school for audio, and he, was mixing, and he just went boom, 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 balls to the wall. And then he just burned himself out. And,
right.
I talked to him, and he was like, I couldn't do it anymore.
Very common.
Yeah. So it's nice to hear, someone like yourself, working so hard in all these different areas. And I think maybe that's part of it too, is it sounds like you keep things interesting because you're doing a lot of different types of things.
Yeah. And I have zero genre preference really when it comes to working with clients. I've worked on just about everything. Now, I don't work on a ton of hip hop. I usually just send that to somebody else because I'm not the best guy to do that. And
right.
I love hip hop. I think it's awesome. But first of all, we don't have a ton of hip hop in Tulsa. It's not like a huge hip hop town or anything.
Oh, really?
Yeah, right. But usually if somebody calls me and wants to do a project, I'm just like, hey, I know this guy here in town. He does it better than me. He does it more often than me.
Go
to him. And so I would say, but I mean rock and jazz and folk and country and like indie rock stuff and pop and, Christian music and all that stuff. I mean, I'm working on lots of different things at one time, and I love it. I really don't have a preference on, I listen to all kinds of music, so.
Right on. No, that's great. I'm the same way. I love all kinds of music, and
that keeps
music interesting for me.
You almost have to if you want to, stay interested, because it's like if you're only like, oh, I only do metal, like you will get burnout. Like over time, you'll just be like, man, I'm so tired of doing the same. You know what I mean?
Yep.
I've heard that same story so many times, and where guys pinhole themselves into this tiny little box of this is what I do. This is what I like. This is what is good. And, and that's all, not only what they do, but what they want to do. They don't even try to do other things. And I think that's one of the biggest factors is that my intern, for example, he works with a lot of heavier bands, but he's not like, I don't want to work with folk artists or, Christian artists or whatever. Like he's totally open to work on whatever is out there. He just so happens to, he plays in a heavy band, so he gets a lot of heavy band clients. So, that's just the way it works.
Yeah, that makes sense. Right on. So to kind of move into my first question, in this show, I really want to talk about recording, the importance of capturing a sound at the source the best way, and capturing, getting it right at that point makes everything in the recording and production process so much easier.
Absolutely.
And there are lots of folks out there who are either, newer to home recording, or, maybe they're trying to start their own studio or do these kinds of things. And there's just lots of questions out there. So my first question is, when it comes to recording, what advice would you give someone who is maybe just starting out recording and they're looking to improve their skills? What's the best way? Is there a shortcut or some kinds of things they can focus on that can help them do better or get better faster?
Sure. So I've got a couple answers for this one for people to improve, because that's something we all struggle with. We all want to improve. And even the guys who have been doing this 30 years still want to improve, right? So we're all wanting to improve. Like it's a common thread. So I'll preface this answer with just saying, like, you can take this or leave this. I'm sort of a no-nonsense type of guy, and I want to give an honest answer. My answer might seem a little bit ironic as well, considering that we're here talking on a podcast. But anyway, okay, so I would say the best advice I could give someone who's starting out and wants to improve is, number one, you don't need to go to school for audio engineering. I personally think it's a waste of time and money, and me as a studio owner, I don't care if you have a degree. I'm actually probably less likely to hire someone that has a degree in audio engineering or something like that, because it generally means that they're 4 years behind. They come out of school with debt and, they've got a piece of paper on their wall, but other people have 4 years of experience and they have records on their wall. And, they've already started working with clients and making connections in their hometown. Now, at the same time, I mean, I'm not saying these schools are a complete waste or anything, but, I just don't think you need it, right? Like that's the big key here is that you don't need to go to school for it. And, you're not going to learn something at school that you can't learn elsewhere. So I'll kind of qualify that with my second part of this, which is, as much as it pains me to say, there's no book or YouTube channel or website or forum or podcast, like I said, the irony of this answer here, or college or anything that will improve your skills as much as time. Obviously, we all listen to podcasts and read magazines, and like I do that when I'm not in the studio. I'm reading about audio and listening to podcasts, and got the magazines. I'm on websites. I'm cruising the blogs and reading articles. I'm doing what we all do, right?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
I mean, we all do that all the time, and we should keep doing that. But then the next day, I go into the studio and do it for 10 hours. You know what I mean?
Right.
So that's the thing. Like, actually putting in the hours and doing it is the best teacher. And not only that, but doing it for other people. Now, there are lots of different listeners from your podcast and from mine. And, a lot of people on my podcast, I'm sure you're the same way, are doing this specifically to record their own music.
Yes.
And if that's the case, you can pretty much ignore my answer when it comes, it's like, all you're getting is, recording your own, you know what I mean? It's a discovery in and of itself, but I'm talking about people that want to do what I do or what, CLA
have
does.
Clients.
Right. Have clients.
Like that. Yes.
And if you really want to, learn how to work with artists and with clients, you got to have them. Like, you got to have them in the studio and try to start working with other human beings. And, you'll learn so much from working with other people who are not audio people, who are the actual musicians. And, you learn a lot from working with really talented musicians that are much better than you are. I think there's that old quote that people say, you shouldn't be the smartest person in a room or, something like that. You know what I'm talking, right? And I remember the first time I worked with a professional session drummer, and suddenly my drums sounded amazing. And I was like, man, did I just mic it up really well? And a friend of mine who was the bass player in the band was like, no, he's just that good. And it really sort of changed my world. I mean, this was, 8 years ago. And it changed my world around because I was like, wow, like a really skilled drummer will play extremely well and pull tone out of the cymbals and the drums and the heads, and he'll balance himself. And I mean, he'll make everything sound better. And so, and like you said up top, like the source really is king. And so working with good sources and, good instruments and good players and in good rooms, I mean, you'll learn so much from doing that. If you're just doing this as a hobby, it's a discovery all along the way, and you're not in a hurry, you know what I mean? But if you're trying to compete and, be in the industry and have a studio and all that stuff, then it's a little bit different story. I would say the third piece of advice I would have is if you're doing this because you want to make money, don't. I mean, you might as well go be like an electrician or a bricklayer or something. I mean, the guy that did the brickwork around my studio, I mean, I think he was here for like 3 hours and he made like $1,000.
So there you go.
Holy cow. What am I doing? Like, this guy, he does amazing work and he's making way more than me. But, so that would be my advice, I guess.
Yeah. And just to kind of add on to that, it's like we were talking about before with you working on all these different things and people getting burnt out. You have to have a passion for it. And it is not the kind of thing where you say, oh, I'm gonna become a mixer and that's when I'm gonna make my first million, because it's just it's not how it works.
No. And you should that shouldn't be the goal anyway. The goal should be to make good music, right? Like make and help clients like fulfill their dream of this sound or this feeling or this record experience or this concept, and like, don't get me wrong. Like, for anyone out there listening, when I first started, I didn't want to work with other people. I only wanted to record my own music. I had no interest in recording other people's music because, I was like, no, I'm just doing this for me. This is my thing. But then people started hearing some of the recordings I made. And, a friend of mine was like, hey, would you mind recording some, I need to have a demo to get some gigs. Would you mind recording some stuff for me? And I was like, sure, whatever. Mm-hmm. And, after working with her, and then I had another guy who came in who was like, hey, I need to get some gigs. Demos are kind of where it starts for a lot of people, right? Because it's cheap. They need something to get gigs. It doesn't have to be, this grandiose production. It just needs to be something to get them gigs. And because of that work, I actually really enjoyed working with other people and saying, hey, maybe try it this way. Or they'd ask me a question like, is this song too long or something? And just that interplay between me and the artist, I actually really started to like. And, so you don't always start out liking that idea, but, it might grow on you.
For sure. So kind of a little bit to speak to that, a lot of people starting out, we're talking about just getting in there and just starting the process and recording people. Obviously, there will be, stumbles and pitfalls and things like that. What is the biggest or most common, or it could be both, mistake either you've made or you have seen made when it comes to the recording process in music?
Absolutely. The biggest mistake that I see people making, that I have made, that, etc., is people ignoring the impact of room acoustics and monitoring. Mm-hmm. And that goes for live rooms, control rooms, one-room studios, booths, everything. Time and time again, I see people ignoring the importance and the power of room acoustics, thinking, they've got the room under control because they've got a little bit of foam or, blah, blah, blah. And they don't understand that, room acoustics is extremely powerful, and, that every room is different and needs different things, and that moving your monitors 1 foot could result in a 10 dB change in your low frequency response, right. For better or worse. It could actually improve. Or they think you can, buy a plugin and put it on their master bus and EQ their room problems away. And it's just not true. A lot of that has been, pushed on us by the quote acoustic panel industry, or by, blah, blah, blah. And I would say it's truly the most misunderstood part of recording. And if people really want good results, eventually they're going to have to really acknowledge it. And the funny thing is, in most cases, acoustic treatment and getting acoustics right for your monitoring or your live room isn't nearly as expensive as some of the gear that we buy. Certainly as cheap as it's cheaper than a Mac Pro. You know what I mean?
That's for sure. Yeah.
It's really not, $20,000 of, what I mean? It's not that. And to me, it just makes sense, right? It's the first and last thing in the chain. The sound starts in an acoustic space. It goes through your gear, and then you hear it through your monitors in an acoustic space. Yeah. And people ignore it. They think it's icing on the cake, to tighten them. And it's no, it is the cake. You know what I mean? The other stuff is the icing on that. That's actually what you're recording and what you're hearing. You hear the source in the room, and based on what you hear in the room, you will pick a mic or pick an amp or pick a snare drum or whatever. And then you put mics on it and you go into the control room, and then you make decisions whether it's good or bad, or if you want to change it based on what you're hearing.
Yeah.
So, aren't people tired of checking mixes in the car? I want to trust my studio nobody's business. I want to walk in here and know what my speakers sound like, what my gear sounds like. I want to know what my room sounds like. I want to know those things. I want to be able to trust it. I don't want to, if I hear a problem, if I take a mix to a car, I should be able to very clearly fix it. And okay, so here's another part of this. Gear is widely available to us now at all price points, right?
Yes.
It's exploded, right? You can go in Sweetwater and basically spend 2 months on their website, just looking, or Vintage King or any of these places, right? And it's all getting better at all price points all the time. The pros are using the same plugins that we are. They're using the same DAWs. They're using a lot of the same preamps, and you know what I mean? It's not, this huge disparity now between the home studio and the pro studio. But the big difference, I'll put it this way, the three big differences between, say, the home recording and the big budget record that we know and love. The number one, big budget records often utilize some of the best musicians in the world playing some of the best instruments ever crafted. I mean, these session players in Nashville that have been playing on records for 30 years and are playing, $10,000 vintage Telecasters with vintage amps and vintage, all this. And it's like incredible gear, right? And they can afford that gear because they've had a long career and they've done it long enough. And half the time those guys bought it back then. So number two, big budget records are made in big budget studios that are designed by brilliant acousticians back in the day. And number three, big budget records utilize engineers with decades of experience making records. Like, that's really the only thing that separates the home recordist from the professional is, experience, great, amazing players, some of the best players in the world, writing some of the best songs on the best instruments and also some of the best studios in the world. And, so like I said, the gear industry will tell you otherwise. They want to sell you another mic preamp or a new plug-in or something to, that says this is what is going to make your stuff better. They want you to buy Yamaha monitors and call yourself a professional studio and, Orlex foam. And, all those things have a place, sure. But I mean, the acoustics will impact everything that is recorded, everything that you hear, every decision you make. So that is absolutely, to me, the biggest mistake people make is just sort of like pushing that aside, like, I'll do that later. Oh, that's not that important. Or, I mean, it's absolutely critical. And so, yeah.
No, I think that's great. And just my last thought on that is, I often talk about the fact that, a lot of people working in home studios work in imperfect spaces, and they may not have a room that is, has all the perfect angles that you want and everything is exactly where you would like it to be. And understanding that and working to address weaknesses in their space and focus on that and really, listen to what results they're getting is so key. And to overlook that and think, well, at least I've got this $1,000 microphone here.
Right.
It's like, man, come on, no.
Right. Well, and another thing is I've heard some people say things like, well, I've seen pictures of these big studios and they don't have a ton of acoustic treatment and stuff like that. And one common thing a lot of people don't realize is that a lot of big studios and a lot of mastering studios, they have false walls. And so what appears to be a wall is actually 5 feet thick of treatment all around the room. And it's covered in some sort of soft, or slat wall type design. And so, that's the thing. It's like these acoustic panels that we buy, that are made out of rigid fiberglass that are 4 inches or 6 inches thick or they're corner traps or whatever, like those really work. But professional studios build that into the room, you know what I mean? Because they know it's important up front. So whereas what we often do is we have to retrofit a space that was designed, like dimensions of building materials are not conducive to recording studio dimensions. I mean, they're all 4, 8, 12, stuff like that. And, we don't want necessarily like divisible dimensions. And, our ceilings are 8 feet tall and our rooms might be 12 feet wide and they might be, you know what I mean? And it's really common, right? And so, you can't blame them, but we use these panels to help with those problems. But, it's really not that expensive. And if you really want to go cheap, you can do it yourself for like really affordably. Like,
oh yeah. And you can get creative with, I see people using mattresses as bass traps and things like that, and there are all sorts of different creative solutions you can come up with that are cost effective and could yield you better results than if you just didn't do anything.
Right. And a measurement microphone is $50 to $100. Like that's all it costs. And whatever that's probably the first thing people should do is you can go buy a cheap like Behringer measurement mic and it's fine. It's nothing like you don't have to go spend $1,000 on a measurement mic, and you can get software like Room EQ Wizard, which is free. And I mean, it's like for like $50 or $100, you can actually know what's going on in your room. And so you can put the mattress back there, or the pillows, or the pillowcase, or the panel traps, or the, whatever you put in your corners or on your walls or whatever, and you can see the effect that they're having, whether it's positive or negative. You can move your speaker. I mean, that's the best thing I think people could start with, is moving their speakers. Because that costs nothing other than the cost of, getting the measurement mic. But that's completely free to move around your speakers. Move them 6 inches forward, 6 inches to the left, make a little circle, and then, do it again. Maybe move a foot forward, a foot to the left, foot to the right, et cetera. And you just kind of go around in this sort of grid, and you find the right placement for your speakers. And there are so many things just like that that nobody talks about that. But it's like, but that's anytime I go do acoustic analysis for a studio or for a church or for a venue. I mean, it's the first thing we do, is just we measure the room and what's actually happening. And you'd be surprised. I mean, it is, I would say, the most common figure that I see in like home rooms converted to studios is plus minus 18 accuracy in the low end, which is terrible.
Yeah, that's...
So, I mean, like, when's the last time you boosted 18 dB at 50 hertz and then cut 18 dB at 70 hertz? Like, that's so strange. Like, why would you ever... But that's what your room will be telling you. Like, that's what it will tell you it sounds like. And so you'll make the reverse move, right? But in actuality, it might have not needed anything, because your room's lying to you. And it really is that powerful, and it really is that dramatic. And, just from moving speakers alone. So an 18 and 18 plus minus 18 range is 36 dB between the highest peak and the lowest null. And just from moving speakers around, not putting any panels in the room, not doing anything like that, just from moving speakers around, we can often get a response to plus minus 9 or 10. So a range of 36 to a range of 20.
Wow.
And that's just from moving speakers around. And then you put the treatment in to help treat the remaining problems. And the treatment will help sort of, the stuff that's too loud, it will pull in, and the nulls that are too low, it will pull in as well, and kind of bring everything closer to center. It's really just a matter of people like admitting that their room's probably not great, and then spending the $50 or $100 to get a measurement mic, and just, seeing what's going on and seeing what you can do, and reading up on the article. And I mean, I've got podcasts about it, and there are YouTube videos from Ethan Weiner and Real Traps and GIK and all these great places to learn about this stuff. So anyway, that's I promised myself I wouldn't get on acoustics rant, because but here I am ranting. Anyway, yeah.
No, that's good stuff. It's important for people to hear, I think. Right on. So my next question is, there are obviously loads of different microphone placement techniques out there and things of that nature. Do you have one, and this could be helpful, especially for folks who are maybe newer to this, but do you have one that you find yourself using most often that works for just a wide variety of situations, instruments, what have you? And if you could you describe that placement?
Sure. I would say in general, I'm very much an on-axis type of guy, which means, on-axis would be straight, looking at the source, point and shoot, basically.
Right.
Whereas off-axis is angled, okay? So that's the, fancy term. But I'm very much an on-axis kind of guy. Like, I don't do a lot of weird angling and stuff like coming in from the side. And, if I want to record an acoustic guitar, I point a mic at it. You know what I mean? Like, that's sort of the simple answer here. But the more complicated answer is, like you said earlier, it's really all about the source. Like, you got to listen to the source in the room and make sure it sounds good, and, make sure it sounds right, that it's right for the track. And sometimes this can be really hard to gauge for loud stuff like snare drums or guitar amps or whatever. When they're banging away on the drums, like, to be able to make the judgment like, yes, that has enough low end. Like, that's really hard to do, because you're sitting there like bleeding. And, but in general, you got to listen to the source in the room, and then you choose your microphones based on the source and pick a mic that's going to highlight the good stuff and minimize the bad stuff, right? Like,
yes, absolutely.
If you've got a young singer, this is really common with younger singers or female singers that sounds very small, for example, their voice just kind of sounds small. Then you try to pick a mic that will beef them up a little bit. And if you need even more beef, you can get them closer to the mic. You know, if you need a little more intimacy also, you can get them closer to the mic. You know, you try to pick the mics for the application, which, you know, and that takes time, you know, but in general, my quick tip is basically just like, don't think about mic placement too much. You know, just put a mic up on it and then move it around and adjust. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, listen to what's being captured.
Yeah. And also think about where that particular source fits in the mix. For example, when I record backing vocals, I have the backing vocalist stand farther back from the mic because I don't do that if it's a duet, but that's different. You know what I mean? That's different. But if it's a backing vocal, I'll have the, you know, lead vocalist, I don't know, 6 inches, 10 inches, whatever from the mic, sometimes closer, sometimes farther away. But my backing vocals might be, you know, 1.5 feet, 2 feet away, 3 feet even sometimes. Sometimes we'll record certain backing vocal parts, like depending on what it is, like 10 feet away. And it's because, you know, the distance is depth and it separates things. It separates things because everyone wants separation and clarity, and we want to be able to pick out individual things in our mixes, right? Well, recording things farther away gives you front to back separation because you're getting depth. It's not just, you know, because if you've got, say, an acoustic guitar one of the hardest things for people to do, and for me as well, is acoustic guitar in a rock song. That's really hard because the acoustic guitar it takes up a lot of room, and, you know, it competes with the drums, and it's just, they don't seem to work. You know, if you think about it in real life, if you've got like really banging drums, like in real life, like you won't hear an acoustic guitar over that. Like you just, So it's weird. It's like we're testing the bounds of reality when we're trying to put an acoustic guitar in a rock track, which is really common in, like, you know, country and even a band like Goo Goo Dolls or something, right?
Yeah.
And so a lot of times what works really well is to actually record, you know, that acoustic guitar a little bit farther away from the mic, 3 feet, you know, something like that, to capture a little bit more that it's sort of sitting back in the track and you're giving separation front to back.
It'll help it sit better.
Right.
By doing that. Yeah.
And not only in tone, but in depth. Like you'll have a little bit of room sound in there. You know what I mean? Even just a little bit can help it kind of sit back in the track a little bit and separate front to back. So I know we can get technical and all this, but the simple answer to your question is basically like, put up a mic and use your brain. You know what I mean? Like if you want it to sit farther back in the mix, then put the mic farther back. And if you need more low end, you can put it up closer because of the proximity effect. And, you know, there's lots of little tiny moves you can make. Don't sit there. And I think, like, even though like those mic robots are really cool, you know, that's not logical for a lot of us to have a mic robot. I mean, that like moves the mic around and you can like tweak it inch by inch, like, you know, it's really cool, but I don't know. I say that if I had one, I'd probably love it. So maybe that's not fair, but, you know, I think, you know, you can't think about it too much. You just kind of think about it in a very logical way and just use your brain and point the mic at what you want to record and point it away from the stuff you don't want to record.
and then just get to it.
Yeah.
All right, so this is actually going to wrap things up for the show today. Kendal had such great insights, so many great tips and techniques that I wanted to split this show into 2 parts. So be sure to tune in for part 2, which is going to be released next week. In the meantime, I wanted to thank Kendal so much for joining me. If you'd like to learn more from him, do check out the Recording Lounge podcast or its site, recordingloungepodcast.com. If you're looking to book studio time, you can learn more about The Closet Studios at theclosetstudios.com, or you can find him on YouTube at youtube.com/recordinglounge. Thank you so much for listening today. And as a reminder, for links and information about today's show and our guest, please check out our show notes at audioskills.com/podcast. Now go out there and make some great music.
Ready to go even deeper with your recording, mixing, and music production? We've got all the info and techniques you need in one place so you can turn it up. Go to audioskills.com and access a huge library of video tutorials and private workshops so you make progress even faster. Come back next week for a brand new episode of the Audio Skills Podcast.